People in Kansas in the US have voted to keep abortion legal, rejecting an amendment to the state's constitution. The ballot in the Republican-dominated state is the first of its kind since the US Supreme Court's decision to end the national right to abortion last June. The vote is being seen as an early indicator of whether abortion rights will motivate voters in November's midterm elections. Let's hear from the United States now. And Amy Littlefield, abortion access correspondent of bi-weekly American magazine The Nation, has been touring the state of Kansas, and she joins me now from Boston. Thank you very much, Amy, for joining us here on the program. This is quite an interesting result from Kansas.
It's a historic day. I mean, Kansas abortion rights activists are celebrating. They are just over the moon. I think no one saw this landslide coming. Everyone I spoke with thought this was going to be a pretty tight vote, especially because Republicans who oppose abortion in the Kansas state legislature had scheduled it for an August primary when a lot of the contested races were Republican races. And so turnout was expected to be low and slanted Republican and anti-abortion. And in fact, it seems that preliminary numbers suggest numbers are actually on par with the 2018 midterm elections. Almost 1 million people, it looks like, actually came out to the polls. There were massive lines at one of the polling stations that I went to. So an enormous turnout and just a huge victory for this tremendous grassroots effort to preserve abortion rights in Kansas.
And Amy, is there a sense of why so many people decided to come out when there was sort of speculation, or the feeling was that they wouldn't, and yet the opposite has happened? Is it just general outrage about this ruling?
I think there are a lot of people, pro-choice Americans have known for a really long time that they represent a majority of people in this country, and that's true even in states like Kansas, where the legislature tends to be anti-abortion and to pass anti-abortion policies. The people tend to disagree. And yet, I think often people are quiet about that, or they haven't been politically active. I followed some canvassers in Wichita, Kansas, where Dr. George Tiller, the abortion provider, was assassinated in 2009. And, we met a couple who had just put a sign on their lawn for the very first time. They were nervous about what their neighbors might think of their, more liberal political beliefs. But they had put out a sign to vote no on this anti-abortion amendment. And that was a big step for them. But little steps like that, I think, all added up. A lot of people who held pro-choice beliefs but were quiet about it or weren't necessarily participating and mobilized, they were mobilized by this tremendous
President Biden said this may happen, and that people would then, vote in response to it in the midterm elections. Is that what it's now looking like?
I think it's a very strong sign that it is. I mean, and especially, some surprising results. I mean, I went to the church where abortion provider Dr. George Tiller was assassinated in 2009. It was a polling place in yesterday's election. And I met an older woman there who was a friend of George Tiller's. And she was wending her way through a line in the place where he was murdered, in his church, and about to vote. And she said, "I'm a dyed-in-the-wool Republican, but I'm voting no." And, I think you saw Republican women out there voting, against what their party would tell them to do. You saw Catholics who said they were breaking with the fact that their church was the primary funder of this anti-abortion amendment. You saw young people turning out. There was a huge, very funny effort to get young people out to vote nay. It was a horse-themed, Western-themed effort. So I think it is a really strong sign of what might be to come in some of the midterm races.
Yeah, Amy, thank you very much for joining us here on the program.